The Supreme Court has ruled the Trump administration can deport migrants to countries other than their own. It's the latest ruling in favor of the president's push for mass deportations. The court's action lifted a lower judge's order that required migrants being deported to have enough time to contact lawyers and present evidence that could show their lives were in danger if deported to certain countries. Joining us now is the Hill's courts and legal reporter, Zach Schoenfeld. Zach, the Supreme Court's majority did not offer its reasoning to lift the ruling, and now the case will return to an appeals court. What are the next steps in this case, and could it end up back in front of the justices?
Hey, Drew, it could end up back in front of the justices. This is just an emergency ruling that, for now, lifts that Boston based federal judge's injunction that had placed these limits on the administration's deportations. So, next, this is going to go back to a lower appeals court, the First Circuit. The Trump administration is going to have their chance to appeal this in normal course. But then whoever loses at the First Circuit could bring this right back to the Supreme Court on their normal docket. But in the meantime, this is a big win for the Trump administration. That appeals process is probably going to take many months to resolve itself. And in the meantime, the Trump administration will now more easily be able to rapidly deport these migrants to third countries, often where they have no ties.
What was the reaction from dissenting justices?
Yeah, Drew, a pretty fiery dissent here from the court's three Democratic appointees. It was authored by Justice Sonia Sotomayor and joined by Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson. I'll just read you a little bit of it. Sotomayor writing that her colleagues find the idea that thousands will suffer violence in far-flung locales more palatable than the remote possibility that a district court exceeded its remedial powers. Sotomayor really across these 19 pages really stressed the idea that if these migrants' claims are true, that they could face violence or persecution if they are deported to these countries, that's true, that this could be a matter of life and death for them. Now, Sotomayor is often in dissent when the Trump administration gets its way on these immigration cases, but even for her, Drew, this language here is quite forceful.
Zach, the lower court's order focused on a flight carrying migrants that initially was headed to South Sudan but ended up in Djibouti. U.S. District Judge Brian Murphy issued an injunction blocking the flight destined for South Sudan. What's the status of that deportation flight?
Those migrants are still in Djibouti, as far as we know. And I should stress here at the onset these migrants are convicted criminals. They are convicted of serious, often violent offenses. They were on their way to South Sudan. And as you mentioned, when the judge got word of it, he had told the administration that it would violate his order. So at the time, he told the administration they didn't have to return these migrants back to the States, but they at least needed to retain custody of them. So the administration chose to bring them to this military base in Djibouti. The last update we got is that these migrants are being detained in a shipping container. But Drew, it does seem that we may be headed for a battle here about what happens to these migrants now following the Supreme Court's ruling. After the justices issued this decision, very quickly, the immigration groups who now represent these migrants went back to the judge in Boston, Judge Murphy, and asked him to issue a new order that would prevent the migrants from getting right back on a flight and headed to South Sudan. But what was really interesting is the judge gave an update last night. He told the plaintiffs that motion was unnecessary. He actually quoted Sotomayor's dissent and said, yes, they may have lifted my earlier injunction, but he said what was not properly before the Supreme Court was this remedy that he had ordered, that these migrants could not be deported to South Sudan. They had to go to Djibouti or somewhere else. And so he said that that was not properly before the Supreme Court and still remains in effect. We haven't yet heard from the government on this, but you got to imagine, Drew, that the Trump administration is not going to be happy about this judge's thinking.
Yeah, this was a major win for the Trump administration as it looks to quickly enforce its immigration crackdown. The president's executive orders continue to get tested at the Supreme Court. Are we getting a better idea of how the justices will rule on the power the administration can wield?
We are. This is the latest in a series of wins for the Trump administration on the Supreme Court's emergency docket. The Trump administration has been bringing what's really an avalanche of emergency applications, to say the least. They brought 19 since Inauguration Day, quite a high number. But we've seen in the cases that have been decided so far that the Trump administration has been winning more often than not. And you see that in the immigration context specifically. It was just a few weeks ago that the court allowed the Trump administration to revoke temporary legal status for hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans. So the Trump administration has been getting a series of wins. But the other thing that I think is important to point out is we know that these decisions are coming down as the justices are simultaneously behind the scenes working on their decision in the birthright citizenship case, where the administration is asking them to rein in these lower district judges who have been issuing nationwide injunctions that block the president's policies anywhere in the country. And because the majority didn't explain their reasoning in this decision, this lower judge's ruling, it was a nationwide injunction. We don't know if the Supreme Court is lifting it because they're about to rein in these nationwide injunctions. We don't know if it's because they actually agree that these deportations are illegal. We just don't know because the majority didn't explain their reasoning. But you've got to take, into account here the fact that we know that we're getting ready for that big decision on birthright citizenship here in a few days.
A lot to follow, as always, with the Trump administration and the courts. Follow Zach's reporting by going over to thehill.com and subscribing to the Gavel newsletter. Zach Schoenfeld, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Drew.